Mr. President, I want to compliment my good friend from Montana, Senator Daines, who was on the floor just now talking about government accountability. And that's what I'm going to talk about, government accountability. And we need much more of it. And we need much more of it, Mr. President, in the Veterans Administration. So today, Mr. President, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to ask for unanimous consent on my bill, the Pro-Vets Act, that we all need to move forward both on funding the VA, and I'm going to talk about this shortfall, but also on having some reforms to the VA. And they're very simple, Mr. President. I'll be really disappointed if any of my colleagues come down here and block my unanimous consent request. That's just me asking all my Senate colleagues to pass this bill right now. But when you hear about it, Mr. President, you'll say, why wouldn't we pass that? Holy cow. VA needs a little accountability, actually a lot of accountability. But here's what's going on. Little context of my legislation, which by the way, Mr. President, right now already has 15 co-sponsors. We just put this together 2 weeks ago, given the crisis at the VA, and it's got 15 co-sponsors. So just 6 weeks ago, Mr. President, Congress was officially informed, and many of us were surprised. And by the way, I sit on the Veterans Affairs Committee, so I'm very focused on these issues. Our committee was informed that the VA was experiencing a $15 billion shortfall, and by the end of this week, tomorrow, they need an additional $3 billion, or veterans across the country, including in my state, the great state of Alaska. It's got more veterans per capita than any state in the country. So we love our veterans, very important constituency of mine. They wouldn't get their benefits unless we act real quick. So, Mr. President, the House acted 2 nights ago, and we're going to get this money done. We'll get it. We want to make sure our veterans have their benefits. But in exchange, we're asking, hey, what's going on over at the VA? I mean, we see this all the time. Mismanagement, last-minute requests for money, illegal bonuses up to $11 million just a couple months ago, paid out to people in the VA who don't deserve it. So my bill is very simple. It's going to bring accountability to the VA. Of course, that's a vital institution for our veterans in our country, with some more oversight and accountability. It's not complicated at all. It's basically two things. We're going to fund this short-term $3 billion amount of money the VA says it needs ASAP, even though they didn't inform us until 6 weeks ago. By the way, the total amount that they need in terms of how they screwed up the budget is $15 billion, Mr. President. That's a lot of money. And so it just says the bill requires two things. It institutes a 3-year requirement for the Secretary of the VA to submit quarterly, in-person budget reports to Congress to encourage greater oversight and financial accountability. That's pretty simple. And that the Secretary should come to us quarterly with these budget estimates and brief our committee, the VA committee, in person, easy, and for any future financial shortfalls, which we're experiencing right now, it would result in the withholding of bonuses for senior VA and OMB personnel who worked on that budget. That's it. That's it, Mr. President. Most people would say, hey, that's pretty good reform. It's not too much. But remarkably, I think one of my Senate colleagues is going to come down here and object. So we're going to throw $3 billion at the VA, and we just have simple reforms. The Secretary come quarterly to the committee and say, hey, we're not going to blow through the budget again. Here's our quarterly estimates. And oh, by the way, if you were part of the team at a senior level that screwed up the budget, you don't get a bonus. What's wrong with that? Maybe my colleagues won't object. That's it. That's the bill. because we're going to give the VA, again, additional money that they didn't plan for. So, Mr. President, this is not the first time this has happened. As a matter of fact, I've been on the VA committee going on 10 years. I really like the committee, as I mentioned. Veterans in Alaska, veterans in America are so important. But the VA in D.C. often screws up the budget, often comes up with scandals. Heck, like I said, just a couple months ago, $11 million went out to VA, senior VA officials for bonuses that they didn't deserve. In a hearing yesterday, I asked, has anyone been held responsible for that? Nope. Anyone held responsible for this budget oversight? Nope. So, as I mentioned, Mr. President, there's been a lot of these kind of scandals. Some of you might remember the VA secret waiting list at the Phoenix Veterans Affairs Health Center system. CNN described this secret waiting list following. The secret list was part of an elaborate scheme designed by the Veterans Affairs managers in Phoenix, where they were trying to hide 1,400 to 1,600 sick veterans who were forced to wait months to see a doctor. And 40 of them died waiting. Pretty scandalous. The hospital in Colorado, that was a budget overrun in 2016 where Congress had to do what we're doing right now, jump in immediately at the last minute. That was budgeted. They were 3 times the amount it was budgeted that they ran over to build that hospital. But we again acted hundreds of millions of dollars at the last minute because of VA mismanagement. And here's the thing, Mr. President, the Congress, even the Veterans Affairs Committee, is becoming numb to these kind of shortfalls and these kind of dysfunctional approaches to management for our veterans. Let me be clear. I work with the VA in Alaska all the time. The people on the ground helping our veterans, the vast, vast majority do a great job. But the problem seems to be here in D.C. with this giant bureaucracy. Last week, the Inspector General, President Biden's Inspector General for the VA in front of the House, testified along the following lines about a report they just had in terms of an investigation of the VA. They said, our staff, Inspector General's staff, routinely finds breakdowns in processes, infrastructure, governance, leadership, and other failings that erode the foundational elements of accountability at the VA. Last week, the IG of the VA said that. These breakdowns impede the VA's efforts to make certain that patients receive timely, high-quality health care and that veterans and other eligible beneficiaries are afforded the compensation and services they are owed. So here's the Biden administration IG, Inspector General, saying, we got big problems at the VA. And now we're seeing it with another cost overrun. Like I said, $15 billion budget shortfall for the VA right now. We only heard about it 6 weeks ago. And I, with several members of the VA committee 6 weeks ago, as soon as we heard about this, sent a letter to the chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee at the end of July saying, hey, we need an immediate hearing right now. Let's do it right now. And have the secretary testify in person to tell us what the heck is going on. What are you doing over there? Okay? Chairman didn't do that. He waited till yesterday to hold the hearing. The secretary didn't show up to come testify. And we heard all kinds of things from the witnesses from the VA. But what we didn't hear, Mr. President, is anything about accountability. We did hear this, by the way. And I think most Americans, most Alaskans would find this stunning. The VA has a new rule. We went through a pandemic 4 years ago. People were doing remote work. Guess what? Most of the federal government is still doing remote work. Most federal employees still work in their pajamas next to a computer at home. The VA's new rule is that you're required to come into the office twice in a pay period. Excuse me? What? So most VA workers in D.C. work at home in their pajamas. Can you believe that, America? We got these big, beautiful federal buildings here, and nobody comes into them. I mean, come on. So maybe the secretary was teleworking yesterday, part of his rule that you only have to come in twice a month to work. So we need accountability. We need accountability. Now, as usual, the VA and other bureaucrats are saying, hey, this is actually a good thing that we got a $15 billion shortfall. This is a good thing because more veterans are getting benefits. Well, listen, Mr. President, I voted for the bill that is helping our veterans with regard to burn pits. I voted for all that legislation. It is good that we're getting veterans to have more benefits that they've earned, but that doesn't excuse the VA mismanagement of its budget or the idea that Congress, if it's going to appropriate more money at the last minute, which is what we're going to do, and I'm supporting that, that we apply accountability. Here's what the legislative director for the VFW supplied in written testimony to the House last week. Quote, since news of the funding shortfall became public, the communications on the matter from the VA has been inappropriately positive. So this is the VFW saying, hey, VA, don't spend this. That it's positive because the VA is delivering more benefits than ever, as if the VA's calculation that now threatens the delivery of all compensation, pension, and education benefits is somehow a positive thing. So the VFW is looking straight at the VA saying, don't spend this. $15 billion shortfall you just told us about, we got to rush to fund it, or veterans across America are going to lose their benefits. That's not positive. No matter how they spin it, it's not positive. It's called mismanagement. So again, Mr. President, all I'm asking for, as part of the money that we are going to appropriate on an emergency basis for the VA, is to simply pass my Vets Act, my Pro-Vets Act. And again, here's all it does. The Secretary of the VA has to come in quarterly to the committee in person, out of your pajamas, and tell us what the budget is so we don't have this again. And if you were part of the VA or OMB team that put forward a budget that the VA went over, you don't get a bonus. That is eminently reasonable, Mr. President, and I hope my colleagues here will support it. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Veterans Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S5074 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reserving the right to object, I share my colleagues' focus on making sure we never have shortfalls that deny our veterans the care and benefits they were promised. And we're going to vote in just a bit on a VA supplemental package to make sure that the VA has the resources it needs. And it even includes reporting requirements similar to what is proposed here. As we implement laws like the PACT Act, which makes worthwhile expansion of our veterans' care, there's going to be some growing pains. That is frustrating, but it is not unheard of. The important thing, and I think we all agree here, is meeting those needs and keeping our word to our veterans and their families. And I would say, as a daughter of a veteran, I take that responsibility very seriously. Now, while I'm not convinced all the elements of this proposal are the most effective way to work with VA on these issues right now, I do sincerely appreciate where my colleague is coming from, and I'm willing to work with him on this. So I look forward to continuing this conversation and working in a bipartisan way to make sure that the VA is working for our veterans. But right now, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from Alaska.
well, I've worked closely with my colleague from Washington on the Veterans Administration Committee in the Senate. I know she's committed to veterans, and I want to work with her on these matters. I will say, though, I would disagree with her on one major issue. She mentioned growing pains, and the PACT Act has expanded veterans' benefits, and that's good. I voted for that bill. But this isn't about growing pains, Mr. President. This is about what the IG just testified to the House on last week, and it is systemic problems of accountability at the VA. And to be honest, if you're on the committee, you know that more than anybody because we see it all the time. So I'm disappointed that simple reforms, accountability, the secretary coming in quarterly, in person, not teleworking like 99% of the VA currently does and shouldn't do, by the way, telling to Congress where they are in the budget so you're not going to have another overrun. And then if you made the mistake, and there is a big budget overrun, you don't get a bonus. Very simple, and I'm really disappointed that we can't undertake basic, simple accountability reforms when we're once again, at the last minute, scrambling to make sure, due to the VA's mismanagement, Congress is coming in with additional money to make sure our veterans get their benefits. That's not the way to run a really important federal bureaucracy and organization like we have with the VA, and I'm disappointed that my bill is not being passed right now, in addition to getting the additional funding to the VA for our veterans. I yield the floor.